Your hosts are here, Sammy and Michelle. By the end of this podcast, you'll know them well. Adulting, navigating the journey of life. Careers to relationships, pain and strife. Put down the rule book, rethink the status quo. If there's another direction you wanna go, find purpose, passion and mastery in all that you do with Status Post Adulting.
Hey, Status Post Adulting family! This is Sammy
and Michelle,
and we are so excited to have entrepreneur, speaker, and author Christy Pruitt-Haynes joining us today. On top of her 20 years of executive and entrepreneurial experience, she's also the recipient of the Nashville Emerging Leader Award, a TEDx speaker with her talk, Nice Girls Can Finish First, and author of I Have to Pay for This Shit. Her newly launched book is a rhyming storybook with a comedic flair and gorgeous illustrations that brings levity to the difficulties associated with sending a child away to college while simultaneously receiving the dreaded tuition bill. Christy, welcome to Status Post Adulting.
Thank you so much. I'm thrilled to be here.
Thank you so much for joining us, Christy. We're so excited to have you here today. And we're really excited to chat a little bit more, both of your journey into entrepreneurship and also talk about your book that you just launched. We had a chance to read it, and we definitely want to dive into that as well. So to start, it would be really interesting, I think, to know a little bit about your background and really how you first got started with entrepreneurship.
Absolutely. So I started working in human resources, first in recruiting and then in benefits, and then finally just as a generalist, so across all areas of HR. And I absolutely loved it. So with my job, initially I traveled quite a bit. I actually moved to a different city to pursue some professional opportunities. I was very much focused on my career. Then I had my daughter and everything changed. My priorities shifted and just the way I spent my time absolutely changed. So fast forward a couple of years, she was about almost 3 years old. And I went through a divorce from her dad. So it was just that she and I for a few years. And during that time, my focus was I had to make sure we still had all of the things we needed financially. I didn't want her to suffer at all. I didn't want anything to change with her lifestyle. So I was still very focused on work until one day, this adorable little 3-year-old picked up a calculator and started pushing a bunch of buttons. And I asked her what she was doing. And she said she was using her BlackBerry. That's what she considered her BlackBerry. She was using her BlackBerry to send me an email to see if we could play.
Aww.
And I said, well, I'm right here next to you. Why do you have to send me an email? And she looked at me just with the most serious look and said, because that's what you pay attention to.
Wow.
And my heart broke.
Oh, no.
I felt like the absolute worst mother in the entire world. And I knew I was doing it for the right reasons. I wanted to make sure I was saving for her future and all of that. But clearly it was sending the wrong message to her on what was most important to me. So that was the day I decided I really wanted to become an entrepreneur so I could control my time, so I could be at every game, every parent-teacher meeting, every class play, just all of the things. So it took me a few months to figure out how, but I did it. By the time she was 3.5, 4 years old, I was a full-time entrepreneur, but I was also her Girl Scout troop leader, and I was the room parent, and I was at every single soccer game that she played in. Even when the team was terrible, I was front row and cheering for her. So that was the reason. That's what really pushed me into entrepreneurship. But then once I started that, I realized I absolutely loved it because it gave me the chance to really pick and choose the work that I wanted to do so I could focus on the things that meant the most to me. And just found it was so much more enjoyable and so much easier to go throughout my day when I was really doing the work that meant the most.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And I think super relatable. I think even just growing up and having working parents, especially ones that really did try to be at every event and balance a lot. When you're older, you can appreciate how much they're doing and juggling. But when you're younger, you sort of just only have this understanding of, oh, are they here? Did they come to my event? Like other people's parents are doing this. Are my parents doing this? And I know there's a lot of different opportunities for everybody to be able to do that or not do that, but it definitely makes a big difference. I think when you grow up and you can look back and say, hey, like it was really, I think we really appreciate the things that our parents went through, like years of piano lessons where we were not very good, but they were still at like all of our little recitals and super supportive.
Yes.
Absolutely. That's what we do. We're there and we're cheering even through that developmental phase that I like to call it when our kids are getting great at something. Yeah, I remember my daughter, she was probably 8 years old, and there was one soccer game I couldn't attend. And 10 years later, she's 18 now, she still brings that up. You remember that time I scored a goal and I looked in the stands and you weren't there? And now she does it just to pick with me. But literally a decade later, she remembers the one game that I missed.
That's so funny. You can make it to 99%, but
yes, but that one she will not let go. And now she does it just to pick with me a bit because she knows how important it was to me to be to everything that she was doing.
Yeah. And Christy, you mentioned that when you were first moving into entrepreneurship, it took you about 3 to 4 months to kind of get situated. Were you still working at that time?
I was, yes. So I started keeping my regular full-time job and just slowly transitioned into entrepreneurship. So first I just had one client and then that slowly increased. So for a while it was extremely busy. It was very hectic and I have to thank my family for sort of stepping in and really helping out so much during that time. But after about, I'd say 6 to 8 months, I felt like I had enough of a client load and I left my full-time job, and probably one of the scariest days for me professionally because you know, letting go of that steady check that you know is coming in every week. So that was a little scary, but turned out to be a great decision for me.
Yeah, that's great to know because I think we have a lot of listeners who are interested in moving into entrepreneurship, but they're kind of scared to just like quit. And I think there's a lot of stuff out there that says, oh, just quit and, you know, burn all your boats and try to figure it out. And that can be a little overwhelming, especially when you have family and things like that.
Absolutely. I think, you know, one of the best ways to do it is to do it slowly. Start with people you already know, reaching out to them to see if they can be clients of yours, and then move into it at a pace that really works for you. I'm a little risk averse, especially because I did have my daughter to think about. So I wanted to make sure we still would have all of our needs met. But now I feel like it's even easier than it was when I did it because there's so many programs set up to really support, you know, being a part of the gig economy where you can do multiple jobs at the same time. So I think, you know, you may have a few months that are super busy, but it's worth it if it allows you to transition into what it is you really want to do.
Yeah, exactly. And I was wondering too, was there a certain goal that you had in place in terms of deciding, okay, when I do X, that's when I'm going to officially quit my full-time job? Or was it a feeling?
It was a little of both. Part of it was a feeling because there is still a little bit of risk. So it has to feel right. But for me, I knew I wanted, once I had enough clients on board, that I was making 75% of what I had been making in my full-time job, I was comfortable making the leap because I figured once, if I was at 75%, I could continue to grow it, but I recognized that I was gaining a lot of additional time, or at least flexibility. I shouldn't say time because entrepreneurship, oftentimes you're probably working more hours, but you're working them at a time that works really well for you. So for me, the flexibility that I gained in my schedule was worth that trade-off. And after about a year or so, I passed what I was making when I was at my full-time job.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, that's pretty quick too.
Yes, yes. I was very lucky. At that point, I'd been in my career for, oh goodness, about 10 years or so. So I built up a pretty good reputation. I networked with a lot of people through the years, and I just reached out to everyone I knew saying, here's what I'm doing. You know, how can you support? Who do you know that may need these services? And early on, I said yes to every job that came my way. And fortunately, after a few months, I realized I was moving away from what it is I really wanted to do. So I got really picky about the jobs I said yes to and really had a good idea of who it was I was targeting and how I could reach them. So it took a little bit of you know, sort of trial and error. But once I figured out who my ideal client was, it sort of took off from there.
I like what you're saying too, because I know, or I believe with your experience, when you moved into entrepreneurship, it wasn't like you just chose something that was completely new and different and totally, broke off from what you were doing. And I'm sure it must have at least made it a little bit, if not easier, like gave you space and opportunity to network and meet some people or like meet clients and stuff that fall under the umbrella of what you were doing before as well.
Absolutely. I'd already built up a reputation in that industry. So that made it a lot easier, both for getting clients, but also it just gave me a bit of peace of mind because I knew I could do the work. I'd done it before. And the other thing is, I knew in the back of my mind, if for some reason it didn't work, I still had the same skills. So I could always go back and get another full-time sort of traditional job. So for me, that worked really well. I do know people, though, who go into entrepreneurship doing something completely different than what they've done in their full-time job. And I think that can be successful also. It just usually takes a little bit longer to sort of build up your client profile, but it can be equally as rewarding and just as much fun.
When you left your job, what was the conversation like with your employer?
Thankfully, they were sad to see me go and said, I was welcomed back. So, you're always a little nervous. What if they're excited to see me leaving and you had no idea? But thankfully, they were very sad to see me go. They asked, if there was anything they could do to help get me established, if there was anyone they could introduce me to, that sort of thing. So that felt really, really good. But the other thing is they really understood. When I went to them and explained why I was doing it, it wasn't that I wasn't happy. It wasn't that I was necessarily running from that job or anything like that. But I was traveling at that point about 50% of the time. So as my daughter was getting older, I needed to be home with her. I didn't want to be away. I didn't want to miss all of those important moments in her life. So they completely understood that. So from that standpoint, they were incredibly supportive and ultimately became a client. I actually did some speaking for them and things like that. So I was able to maintain that connection, but do so in a way that now worked really well for me and for my life.
I think that's so important to leave on a good note if you can, to have that relationship. Because like you said, I think the world, anytime you're in a certain space, like it's a small world and there is a lot of opportunity for them to work with you in the future and to give references if needed. And so it doesn't have to be this ugly, dramatic scene when you leave a place. Like I think a lot of times, no matter the circumstance, there can at least be some sort of like mutual respect or appreciation when you move on.
Absolutely. Yes, I believe in not burning bridges. You never know when you want to cross those again.
Yeah.
But just as you said, even if it's just to have a reference, you don't know who may be connected to someone else. And people talk. I knew I could go to a potential client, and one of the first things they may have done is gone back to my previous employer if they knew anyone there and said, so what was Christy like? Is this someone we should work with or stay away from? So I really wanted to maintain that relationship, both just to make sure that door was always open, but also, again, it gave me the ability to have them as a client in the future. So I absolutely loved that.
Yeah. And speaking of being nice in the workplace,
yes,
we did want to talk a little bit too about your TED Talk, Nice Girls Can Finish First.
Yes.
And you talk a little bit about what you call the miscongeniality complex. Could you tell us a little bit more about that?
Absolutely. So what was fascinating to me is there has never been a Miss Congeniality who has also won Miss America.
That's crazy.
So Miss Congeniality is the contestant who's considered the kindest. She takes care of everyone else. She's the one who may tell you, oh, you got a little lipstick on your teeth. You may want to clean that up or something like that. It's voted on by all of the contestants in the competition. So it's a wonderful honor to win. But what that really said to me was it seemed as though the contestant who was the kindest, who was the most caring, who, looked out for everyone else, didn't always have the same qualities associated with winning the crown. And for me, that was a problem. And I think I saw that same thing echoed in so many workplaces, particularly for women. It can apply to anyone, but I think especially women. Women are oftentimes looked to be kind. They're looked at to take care of other people and that sort of thing, instead of focusing on them and their career and their growth and things like that. So I wanted to really make the point that it's possible to be both. You can be a great person and still be extremely successful in your career. And you can progress. There just needs to be some thoughtful things that we do every day to make sure that people continue to see us as intelligent and capable, and that we have the drive to move forward in our careers without labeling us as sort of the office witch, as I like to call it.
Mhm.
And sometimes they may swap out that first letter for another letter, because so often women are looked at, you either have to be successful or you have to be, kind, and it's possible to be both. I think it just takes a few very deliberate actions and ways to do that.
That's so true. And what I liked a lot in your TED Talk is you also talked about how women will take on a lot of responsibilities at work that are not classically also the
Yes.
responsibilities that are associated with promotions and raises and
Your
things like
job
that.
description.
Yeah, like organizing
Exactly.
potlucks and things like that.
Yes. Oh, that drives me crazy. And again, it's being nice, it's taking care of others, it's important things, but it takes time. And that takes time away from doing the jobs that actually get noticed for promotions. So things like volunteering to clean the office kitchen, or saying, oh yeah, I'll organize the holiday party and things like that. Great things to do. And maybe you can be on a committee with other people doing it. But when that becomes a big way that you spend your time every day at work, people start looking at you as, oh, this is the party planner.
Mhm.
And the party planner isn't the one who gets promoted to director and vice president, et cetera. I remember several years ago when I worked for an organization, I was the only female department head. So anytime we had meetings with all of the department heads, everyone expected me to take notes.
Oh my gosh.
But
Mm.
if you're in a meeting taking notes, you can't participate in the same way because you're focused on capturing down all of the notes. So the first time I was asked, I thought, okay, no big deal. Maybe we're going to rotate this. I'm a team player. No problem. The next time I was asked, I thought, I'm noticing a bit of a pattern here. This is not my job, but I want to try and be accommodating. Well, the next time we got together as a meeting, I deliberately did not take pencil and paper.
Oh.
So when someone said, hey, Christy, do you mind taking notes? I'm like, oh, I wish I could. Didn't bring anything to write things down, but maybe, John or Matt or whoever can do this. And then I said, or maybe we can start inviting one of our assistants to the meeting. Then they can capture the notes since that's part of their actual job. But I realized pretty quickly I could not get stuck as being the person that people associated with note taking and things like that. That wasn't my role, and I needed them to see me as a peer. So it's little things like that so often we do without even thinking about it, but it absolutely affects the way other people perceive us. So my TED Talk was just all about some of those little things we can do to make sure we're being perceived in the best way possible.
Yeah, it's so true. I definitely see that at my work. I'll do like a lot of secretarial tasks all the time. And I never thought about it as something that other people don't do, because I feel weird always asking someone to like, oh, can you scan this? And I'm like, I can walk to the scanner real quick. But then my manager actually had a talk with me like about a month ago or so. And she said, you have to start delegating these tasks and not doing them yourself.
Mm-hmm.
That kind of reminded me of having the mentor as someone looking out for you that you had mentioned.
Yes.
As one of the strategies to a way to manage the whole miscongeniality complex issue.
Absolutely. A mentor can be so helpful because they can tell you those little things, again, where you wouldn't notice it, you wouldn't think anything of it, but someone else can recognize it. And oftentimes they may hear how other people are talking about you in the workplace, and not necessarily in a bad way, but just saying, oh yeah, Sammy's great. Anytime you need something done, give it to Sammy.
Yeah.
When what that does is it pulls you away from your actual job. So mentors and sponsors and those people who are willing to talk about all of the great things you're capable of, to really, what I say is say your name in a room that you haven't entered yet, and bring you up as someone who should be considered for promotions or maybe moving to another team or something like that. That's a great way to really elevate your professional standing without you having to be the one who's constantly saying, pick me, I'm great. Because sometimes that can feel a little uncomfortable for people. But when someone can do that on your behalf, it works wonderfully. And again, they can be there to give you those little subtle reminders of, you may want to do this. Maybe you want to go ahead and delegate that to someone else. Or have you thought about doing it this way? That sort of thing. It's a great relationship to develop within your workplace.
I agree. I think that it's so important to be able to set boundaries and speak up for yourself and have somebody champion for you. And it makes it that much easier when you have people you know that support you. Especially, I think, when you're trying to disrupt the environment a little bit, because sometimes it can be a little bit shocking when you're like, hey, like, I don't really want to take notes because it feels like you're always asking me. And I'm starting to notice that there's something different about me that maybe you didn't realize it or not. But I've had like offices that are a little bit more female dominated and some that are more male dominated. And when there's more women in the room, and actually, I think also when you've been there for a little bit, it helps too. It's just so much easier in a meeting to call something out and then have like 5 women pop in and be like, yeah, why is this happening? And it just helps to know that people are there versus when you're alone and you're like, hey, I don't really, I'm kind of busy and I don't know if I want to take that on.
Yes.
And so, yeah, I think having someone there to both champion your work and also call out those things for you as well is so helpful.
Exactly. And you're absolutely right. There's strength in numbers. So when other people can say, you know what, yes, I've noticed this too, and you shouldn't do this, or this doesn't seem right, or I think we're being treated a little different, that sort of thing, it really does help so much. And another thing you mentioned was around setting boundaries. That's something else that I think is so important. And one of the things I talk about in my talk, I mentioned earlier that I used to travel about half the time with the job that I had. The one caveat I set with that, where there were a couple. First, I said I will never travel on my daughter or my niece's birthdays. I said I have to be home on the weekends. And then the other thing was I had a habit at that point of singing this good night song to my daughter. And we did it every night, no matter what. So I said, if I have to travel, I've got to have time to sing her the good night song. We do it at 7:30, and I don't care where I am, I'm going to sing this song. And everyone was like, okay, sure, whatever, no big deal. And there was one evening where we were all in this big meeting together, and it was 7:30, and I said, oh, I got to go. And they said, where are you going? I said, I've got to step out to call my daughter to sing her the good night song. And a few people looked at me a little funny, and I said, I've told you this before. This is one of my non-negotiables. This is my boundary. I'm here at this meeting. I'm participating, but this is more important. And after doing that a few times, it got to the point that someone said, you don't have to leave. Just sing the song here. We'll all join in. We'll do background for you or something. So that's what we did. But had I not stuck to that boundary, then other people would not have necessarily advocated for me to do so either. So it was really up to me to say, this matters, and I'm telling you this in advance, and I'm going to absolutely stick to it. And I did that, and it wasn't a big deal. It didn't disrupt the meeting. We were able to jump right back in and keep going. But it was a way for me to still show my daughter, you matter, you're important, no matter where I am, we're going to continue this habit.
Yeah. I think it's so surprising to people too, to realize that you can ask for things and you can set those boundaries. And a lot of times that also opens it up for other people as well, to be able to see like, hey, like somebody else is setting this boundary and the company is respecting it. That means that I can also set time aside for my kids or events or things that I need to go to. So I think it has that dual option where usually, hopefully, your employer is somebody who can respect that. And also it shows that, again, like your peers, they can see like, okay, they're letting Christy sing goodnight to her child every day. I can probably also FaceTime my kid and give them a quick goodnight. It doesn't have to be like, I have to sacrifice everything for my work, including my family.
Exactly. And that's what it does, because you pay attention to what other coworkers do. So it was not only helping me, but it did, as you said, it showed other people this is possible. We can integrate our work and personal lives. We just have to be really thoughtful about how we do it, and we have to be diligent about sticking to it.
Yeah, exactly. And I know your daughter is now going into college, which I believe would probably be the spark for your book. I have to pay for this shit.
Yes, yes.
And we did want to talk a little bit about that. When did you first start thinking about writing your book?
Honestly, it was the day she was accepted to her top choice school. So I hadn't thought about it before, but once she got in, she was there. She wanted to open the email or the notification by herself. I wanted to be the parent who was sitting there recording a reaction video, and she absolutely did not want that. So, I'm sitting in the living room. My leg is literally shaking because I'm so nervous for her because I know how much she wants this. And I know I'm either going to hear complete silence from her room or I'm going to hear her scream. So I'm just sitting there, pretending to be patient, knowing I'm absolutely not. And after what felt like forever, but I think in reality was just a few seconds, I hear her scream and come running down the hall. I did it!
Aww.
So I knew she'd gotten in. So in that moment, I jump up, I'm cheering, I'm hugging her. All of us have tears in our eyes. And I had three thoughts simultaneously. First, it was how proud I was of her. I was just so, so proud of her. She worked so hard for this. So I was really, really happy and excited for her. Then it hit me. She's actually leaving. My baby will not be living here anymore. So then there was this just overwhelming sense of sadness and worry and concern. And then instantly my next thought was, oh my goodness, I've got to write this really big check. College is not cheap. This is more money than I have spent on pretty much anything. And they're going to want this money every year for the next 4 years. So in that moment, it occurred to me, this is a lot. There are a lot of emotions going on. And typically when you're feeling really emotional, it's not the best time for making decisions. But I had very important decisions to make. I had to figure out how we're going to pay for this and make sure everything is done in a way that's going to work best for all of us long term. And I didn't want her to have a lot of student loans and things like that. So I have all of these thoughts going on mixed with all of these emotions, and it just felt overwhelming. So, that's when the idea for the book came. It was literally that night. It was probably a couple months later before I sat down to actually write it. But once I did, I wrote the whole thing in a day and then shared it with a few people, shared it with my sister and a few other moms who had kids going off to school. And all of them said, yes, this is absolutely how I feel. She said, I've been looking for something to explain how I feel and to show, that we're both sad, we're happy, and we're also scared. So, the thought behind it was to create one book that just captured everything that parents were feeling at this time, but did so in a way where we could sort of laugh about it a little bit because we need to laugh. It holds the tears back a little longer.
Yeah.
So I wanted to capture the joy of this time, but really be very realistic and transparent about all of the different emotions I'm feeling.
Yeah, it's interesting because, this whole time we've been talking about how you pretty much moved into entrepreneurship. Probably sounds like number one reason was to have more time to spend with your daughter. And now all of a sudden nobody's
leaving me
at home. Yeah, exactly.
Yes, she's leaving me. And what's funny, and I said this to a friend recently, I know I had this really rich, engaging, fun life. I know I used to have all of these really cool conversations before my daughter or my niece were born. I have no idea what I talked about. Like these last, almost 20 years have been solely about her. So now that she's moving to college and she's not going to be here every day, I have to figure out what life looks like. And I think a lot of empty nesters are sort of figuring that out because so much of our time and attention and pretty much every decision you make when you're a parent, you first think, how will this impact my kid? So now that I don't have that necessarily as my first thought, I got to figure out what I'm doing with my life.
Yeah, it's funny because we can even relate to that now to some extent because we both moved home during the pandemic. And so our Indian parents were actually so thrilled, even though there was 4 of us in a 2-bedroom apartment.
I know people always ask, they're like, oh, how did your parents feel about you moving back home? I'm like, yeah, I mean, I don't know if it's cultural, but our parents were not sad.
Oh, no, I've told her, you can live here forever for all I care. You will, wherever I live, you always have a room with your name on it. Come back, stay as long as you want. My mom actually lives with me, so I am very much about
Yeah.
multi-generational living. So it's, I would be completely happy with her graduating school, coming right back home and staying here forever. I don't think she's going to do that, but I can keep my fingers crossed and I can wish.
Yeah, it's true. You never know. I think there was a point where, especially both of us had at one point lived at home like a year after college.
Hmm.
And after that, I was like, I am never moving back home. It was impersonal. I just really wanted to be independent and do my own thing. And then life happens. And I was so happy to have that opportunity. My parents, I was leaving my job and my parents, my mom was in my ear. She's like, yeah, we could always move home. That would give you a little bit of extra time to figure things out. And I was like, no. And all of a sudden I was like, I mean, I guess you're right. I guess it does make sense. But then when we decided last year that we were going to leave, they were so sad. It was funny, as like 30-year-old women, she was like, oh, how are you going to eat? How are you going to do this? I'm like, we've lived by ourselves for years, right?
But you were always a baby to your mom, to your parents. Anytime, and I know I look at my daughter now, and she's almost as tall as me. She's this very much adult person, but I look at her and I still see her as this tiny little 5-year-old. Like, this still feels like when I first took her to kindergarten. It feels the same way. So yeah, you're always your mom's baby, and I don't think that ever changes at any age. Even my mom now, I'm 46 years old, but if I go out somewhere, she will stay awake until I get home.
Yes.
Because she still wants to know that I'm home and I'm okay. And, those things don't change just because your kid gets older. So even now, I know she's ready. I know she has all the skills to be successful, but I still wish I was there. I still just want to be a part of everything because that's my baby. At the end of the day, that's my baby.
Yeah. Well, Christy, we love the book. It's so beautifully illustrated. It's so funny. I think it's very modern as well. Like, I think it was something that had my mom had the opportunity to even read through something like this, it would have given her a little bit less of that feeling like, oh, I should be happy my kids are leaving and I should be so excited to get my time back. When in reality, she was feeling all of the emotions that you were feeling. My dad as well. I think that this book is such a great gift for anybody who's sending their kids off, great gifts for people who have kids that are graduating. You give so many trinkets and stuff to your friends when they graduate, and I think it's nice for the parents to be like, look, I know what you're going through. You might be feeling a lot of things right now. And so I really like it.
Thank you. That was actually something I thought about when I was writing it. Because, when someone enters parenthood, you have a baby or you adopt, however it is you enter parenthood, everyone kind of rallies around you and they offer all this advice and support and you have this instant community.
Yeah.
But when you transition from what I like to call, in-house parenting to long distance parenting.
Yeah.
So as you transition to that, you don't have that same sense of community. People don't rally around you in the same way, but it's just as emotional. So, that's the other thing I wanted the book to do, to help people know you're not alone. There are a lot of us trying to figure out this whole empty nesting thing. And it's not easy, and it is completely normal to feel all of those different emotions that you're feeling. And we're going to figure it out. It may take a little time, but we'll get there. So I actually recently created a list of 10 things parents can do to not lose your minds as your kids are going to college. So people can download that from all my social media platforms. So it's just all kind of ideas like, you now get to travel, and you get to travel the places that you want to go, not necessarily the place your kid wanted to go. And, things like that, about different experiences you can have with your friends or finding new hobbies. So things that we all need to do to sort of maintain our sanity during this very, very odd time in life.
Yeah. Well, Christy, we are so genuinely honored to have you on our podcast today.
Thank
you so much for joining. You've had such an impressive career. You've done so many really cool things. And so we really think your story is going to resonate with a lot of people who listen to our podcast. And if they want to find you, look more into your information, we'll share any information in our show notes. But what are some of the best ways to follow you?
Perfect. Thanks for asking. So I am across all social media platforms. On Instagram, I'm at Christy Pruitt Haynes. So ChristyPruittHaynes. And then there in my bio is a link that takes you to the book website, my professional website, all of the other resources that I've talked about. So that's probably the easiest way, but I would love for people to, reach out, engage. Let's figure this whole empty nesting thing out together.
Yes, definitely. And is there anything else any last notes you want to leave for our listeners?
Yeah, I think the last thing would be, first to any parents that are out there, we will get through this. Even if you don't completely know how, we will figure this out. And I think to anyone who is sort of, whether you're new in career, still figuring out what you want to be when you grow up, I think all of us are sort of constantly figuring that out. I would love to be a lottery winner when I grow up, but seeing how that hasn't happened, I'm still kind of navigating everything else. But, the one piece of advice that I give my daughter and anyone else is don't be afraid to try new things, whether it's entrepreneurship, whether it's a new career, even figuring out a new hobby as your kids are leaving. I think there's so much fear that oftentimes keep us from doing things we really want to do. But the reality is there are very few downsides. I'm one of those, my thought is, if saying yes doesn't hurt you or someone else, say yes. Just try the thing, think about it, figure out a way that it can work for you, and go out there and try something new, because you get so much from it. Even if all you discover is, I don't really like this, that's something you can scratch off your list and then try something different. So, the longer we just keep trying new things until we find what really fits for us, I think we end up with a much happier and fuller life.
Yes, Christy, I think you're such a testament to that.
Thank you.
We've looked at a lot of your different stuff online, and you've had a really interesting journey. And I think a lot of the success that you've had in life is due exactly to that, being unafraid to make changes, to take a risk, to try something different. And so I think that's the perfect message to end this episode on. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you both for having me. This has been so much fun.
Yay, thank you.
Thank you, Christy. And listeners, be sure to check her out. We'll post the links in the bio. And if you know someone who's going to be an empty nester soon, or if that's you, definitely check out the book, I Have to Pay for This Shit. I think it's very giftable. So it's a nice, light, but also real book to give anybody you know who's going to be an empty nester soon. And be sure to join us next time as we put down the rule book and rethink the status quo.